Welcome to Femme Fantasy, where transformation, elegance, and self-discovery come to life. Av. When I first joined Vasara Dynamics, I thought it would be a dream job. It was the kind of company everyone in the city whispered about: sleek glass towers, high-end fashion contracts, a reputation for innovation and discipline. I was 26, freshly promoted from an assistant role at a smaller firm, eager to prove myself. I didn't expect that my life would begin to split into two people inside those mirrored walls, one I thought I was, and another I didn't recognize. My manager, Ms. Lucille Varon, was known for being ruthless but visionary. People said she could look at someone for 3 seconds and see their weaknesses, their fears, and exactly how to control them. When she called me into her office that first week, I thought it was for a standard review. Her office smelled faintly of jasmine and ink. Everything in it was symmetrical: 2 chairs, 2 lamps, the skyline reflected evenly in the glass behind her. She gestured for me to sit. "Eli," she said, her voice smooth and deliberate. "I don't believe in resumes. I believe in adaptation. Tell me how well you adapt." I stumbled over some words about multitasking, learning quickly, taking feedback. She smiled slightly, as if she'd already heard every excuse. "You'll have to do better than that here," she said. "Vasara doesn't reward competence. It rewards transformation." Those words stuck with me for days. Transformation. At first, I thought she meant corporate growth, changing strategies, evolving skills. But I didn't know that she meant something much more literal. It began subtly. She called me in again at the end of the second week and told me my presentation style was too stiff. I needed, she said, to loosen the edges, to be softer, more fluid, less aggressive. "You have presence," she added, "but it's trapped behind armor. People can't connect with you if you're hiding behind all that noise." I nodded, not fully understanding. She handed me a small black box. "A personal exercise," she said. "Wear what's inside tomorrow. Don't ask why yet." I opened it when I got home. Inside were delicate lace undergarments, faintly pink, folded with meticulous care. My face flushed hot, though I couldn't explain why. There was no note, just a card that said, "For alignment." I nearly called her that night to ask what she meant, but something in her tone earlier made me hesitate. I put the box on my desk, stared at it for an hour, and tried to convince myself it was a test, a loyalty check, maybe even a cruel joke. But curiosity, and maybe fear, won. The next morning, I wore them under my clothes. They felt strange at first, a secret no one knew, a quiet wrongness brushing against my skin. I kept telling myself it was temporary. But when Ms. Varon saw me that morning, her expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Better," she said simply, and turned away. That word unsettled me all day. Better? How could she tell? I sat through meetings distracted, hyper-aware of every movement, every glance. It was as though the air in the office had changed, like I'd crossed some invisible line I couldn't uncross. By the end of the week, she called me in again. "You did well," she said. "But this isn't about obedience. It's about learning who you are when your assumptions are stripped away." I wanted to ask her what that meant, what she expected from me, but her eyes stopped me. "This phase will be difficult," she added. "But you'll come out cleaner, lighter. If you trust me." The word trust echoed in my mind long after I left. That night, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. It wasn't that I looked different, it was that I felt different, more conscious of every detail, every motion. I thought of what she'd said about presence, about armor. Maybe she was right. Maybe this was about breaking down my walls. But deep inside, a quiet fear began to grow, a fear that I wasn't just changing for the job. I was changing in ways I didn't understand. And Ms. Varon was watching every step. The following Monday, the office felt different, quieter somehow, as though everyone knew something I didn't. The glass walls reflected my every move, making me feel exposed. Every click of my shoes echoed louder than usual. I told myself to focus on the reports I had to submit, the calls I had to make, the client summaries stacked on my desk. But underneath the surface, that strange awareness pulsed again. At noon, a message appeared on my screen. "Conference room 9. Noon sharp." It was from Ms. Varon. No signature. No context. When I walked in, she was waiting with a small group of department heads. All of them turned toward me, and for a moment I thought I had made some kind of mistake. But Lucille's eyes softened, and she gestured to the seat beside her. "You'll be observing today," she said. "I want you to notice the rhythm of communication. Who leads, who yields." The meeting unfolded like choreography. Subtle glances, pauses, the way voices overlapped or deferred. I noticed how the women spoke differently from the men, and how Lucille commanded the room without ever raising her voice. She didn't fight for control. She possessed it by presence alone. I started to understand what she meant about softness being strength. Afterward, she walked beside me through the corridor, heels clicking in perfect rhythm. "You learn quickly," she said. "But I see resistance. You keep trying to reassert control when I ask you to release it." "I'm not sure what you mean," I said. She smiled slightly. "You will. Tomorrow, 7 a.m. My office. Don't be late." That night I barely slept. I kept thinking about her words. Release control. It sounded harmless, but the way she said it made me feel like it was an order I couldn't refuse. At 7 a.m. sharp, I stood in her office doorway. She was arranging a rack of clothes, blouses, skirts, jackets, all in muted tones. She didn't look up when I entered. "Close the door," she said. She handed me a neatly folded outfit and gestured toward a curtained corner. "Today you'll observe from a different perspective. Change into this." My pulse raced. "Is this for a presentation?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "For awareness," she said simply. "If you can't understand the roles we play, you can't transcend them." I hesitated, but something about her composure made disobedience feel impossible. Behind the curtain, I unfolded the clothes. The fabric was light, elegant, a cream blouse, tailored skirt, low heels. They fit perfectly, as though she had known my measurements before I did. When I stepped out, my reflection in the office glass startled me. Lucille regarded me silently for a moment, then said, "Now walk to the end of the hall and back. Don't think about how it looks. Think about how it feels." I obeyed. The click of the heels sounded tentative at first, but as I moved, a strange calm settled over me. It wasn't humiliation like I expected. It was something quieter, like shedding noise I hadn't realized I carried. When I returned, she was still watching. "What did you notice?" "I felt different," I said carefully. "More aware, maybe. More controlled." "Not controlled," she corrected softly. "Aligned. You're learning to inhabit space differently. That's the beginning." She made a note on her tablet and dismissed me. As I left, she said, "Keep the outfit. You'll need it." That evening, I sat in my apartment staring at the folded clothes. They weren't just fabric anymore, they were evidence of something changing inside me. Each thread seemed to hum with tension, between who I thought I was and who I might be becoming. The next day, the whispers began. Colleagues glanced up from their desks, conversations paused mid-sentence when I entered. I wasn't sure if they knew or if I was imagining it, but the paranoia grew. Later that week, Lucille sent another message, "Phase 2 begins Monday." No explanation. No signature. I told myself I could stop anytime. That I was just playing along. But when I tried to imagine quitting, I realized I couldn't. There was something magnetic about her control. A part of me wanted to see how far it would go, as though the edge of this transformation might reveal something vital. That weekend, I caught myself rearranging my posture in the mirror, testing the way Lucille moved, the quiet grace she carried like armor. And for the first time, I wondered if maybe that was what she'd been trying to teach me all along, that transformation wasn't punishment. It was revelation. But by Monday, I would learn that revelation can also feel like confinement. Monday arrived with a strange mix of dread and anticipation. I told myself it was just another week at work, but deep down I knew something irreversible had begun. I walked through the revolving doors of Vasara Dynamics feeling like the building was breathing, its polished glass inhaling every thought, every hesitation. The message waiting on my screen was brief: report to floor 19, orientation room. I'd never been to that floor before. Most employees joked that it was where the Vasara experiments happened, internal projects that blurred lines between departments, hierarchies, and, apparently, identities. When the elevator doors opened, the air felt different. Quieter, colder, almost like the world above had been muted. The orientation room was minimalist, with a single table and 2 chairs. Ms. Varon sat at one end, a digital tablet glowing before her. She didn't look up immediately. "Sit," she said softly. I obeyed. After a moment, she turned the tablet toward me. On the screen was a list of words: composure, empathy, reflection, authenticity, flexibility. These, she said, are the attributes of alignment. The company doesn't want uniformity, it wants resonance. And that requires transformation at a personal level. I frowned slightly. You mean psychological conditioning? She smiled, a small, unreadable curve. No. Awareness. When people build too rigid an idea of who they are, they become predictable. Predictability is weakness. She leaned forward. You've built yourself on resistance, Eli. I'm asking you to rebuild yourself on awareness. I didn't know how to answer, but something in her tone, calm, deliberate, made it impossible to dismiss. She slid a new card across the table. It read, Phase 2 Directive, Behavioral Mirror Training. When you step outside this room, she continued, you will start observing how you communicate. Every conversation, every gesture. You'll mirror others subtly, posture, tone, rhythm. Not to manipulate, but to understand. The more you mirror, the more you'll see what hides beneath their masks. It sounded bizarre, but strangely logical. I nodded. As the week went on, I practiced. I adjusted my stance when I spoke to others, softened my tone when they did, mirrored their breathing unconsciously. At first, it felt artificial, but soon it became second nature. And as Lucille had predicted, I began to notice things I hadn't before. Small tremors in people's voices, hesitation in their laughter, the invisible power lines that ran through every interaction. But it came at a cost. The more I mirrored others, the less certain I became of myself. By Thursday, when I caught my reflection in a dark window, I hesitated. My gestures no longer felt like mine. My smile looked practiced, borrowed from someone else. That evening, I found another envelope on my desk, cream-colored, sealed with the Vasara insignia. Inside was a note from Lucille. Identity is malleable. Don't mistake loss for growth. I didn't know whether it was meant as reassurance or warning. The next morning, she called me back to floor 19. You've made progress, she said. But you're still afraid of being seen. Alignment isn't only about how you act, it's about exposure. Vulnerability. She gestured toward a wall of mirrors that hadn't been there before. Stand there, she said. I did. My reflection multiplied into infinity, hundreds of versions of myself, each subtly distorted by light. Tell me, she said softly, which one of them is you? I stared for a long time. Each reflection seemed to move a fraction slower, as if waiting for me to decide. I don't know, I admitted finally. Good, she said. That means you're beginning. I didn't understand what she meant then, but as the days passed, I began to feel a shift, not loss, not confusion, but expansion. As if I were learning how to inhabit different versions of myself without fear. And though her methods still felt unnervingly precise, a part of me started to believe that Lucille wasn't breaking me. She was testing how far I could bend before I found something true beneath the surface. But late one evening, as I was leaving the building, I saw her standing by the glass balcony on the top floor, watching the city lights below. She didn't see me, or maybe she did and didn't care. For the first time, I saw something different in her, a kind of weariness, almost sorrow. It struck me then that maybe she wasn't free either. Maybe she had gone through the same transformation once, and never quite came back. That thought stayed with me long after I left the building, echoing in the rhythm of my steps, whispering the same question over and over. If transformation never ends, when do you know who you really are? By the next week, sleep had become elusive. I would lie awake long after midnight, staring at the faint skyline outside my window, my thoughts circling the same questions. Was I still myself? Or was I simply a reflection of what Ms. Vaughan wanted to see? The more I thought about it, the less certain I became. The only constant was her presence. Every morning, a small note would appear on my desk, a single line written in her careful handwriting, stay observant, or listen to silence. They felt like riddles, and yet they always found a way to connect to something that happened later that day. I began to realize that her lessons were not about obedience at all, they were about perception. One morning, she called me into her office and asked me to sit. She poured 2 cups of tea, something she had never done before. Tell me, she said, what did you learn from the mirrors? I hesitated. That identity isn't fixed, I said finally. That maybe we become who we needed to be in each moment. Her gaze softened. That's closer to the truth than most people ever get.
She took a sip of tea.
But don't confuse adaptability with absence. If you forget your center, you'll drown in everyone else's reflection. That idea, a center, lingered with me.
What was my center? Was it ambition? Fear?
The quiet part of me that had always wanted approval?
The truth was, I didn't know.
That afternoon, she assigned me a project, one that would test everything she'd taught me. You'll lead the rebranding pitch for the Amara line, she said. They are difficult clients.
Traditional. Resistant to change.
This is your chance to show me you understand resonance, not persuasion. I prepared for days, analyzing their tone, their language, the subtext of every email. When the meeting arrived, something strange happened. For the first time, I didn't rehearse.
I simply responded. I spoke with a calm that felt foreign yet natural.
Every point landed, every question dissolved before it could become a challenge. Afterward, the clients nodded approvingly, their skepticism replaced by curiosity. I felt something like pride rise in my chest, not the old sharp kind, but something quieter, cleaner.
When they left, Lucille looked at me for a long time. You see now, she said. You don't win by force.
You win by reflection.
I wanted to thank her, but she wasn't finished.
This phase is almost over. There's one last thing I need you to do, a final alignment test. I waited, tense.
You'll spend the next week without the name Eli, she said calmly. Names are anchors. I want to see how you function without one. I opened my mouth to protest, but she raised her hand. No one here will call you by it.
Your emails, your ID, your workspace, all blank. Let people define you by what they perceive, not what they are told. The instruction unsettled me more than anything else. For the first few days, it was disorienting. People hesitated before addressing me, some used nicknames, others avoided direct reference altogether. I felt invisible, detached from context. But then something unexpected happened. I began to listen more, to observe more deeply. Without a label, I wasn't defending an identity anymore. I was simply present. I noticed patterns I'd missed before. The way tension rippled through meetings, the subtle alliances between departments, the quiet exhaustion behind Lucille's perfect composure. By the end of the week, I understood what she meant by resonance. It wasn't imitation, it was empathy stripped of ego.
On the final day, Lucille called me back to her office. You've done well, she said. Most people fight until they break. You allowed yourself to bend.
I asked her quietly, what happens now? She studied me, her expression unreadable. Now you decide whether you want to keep what you've learned, or forget it.
Both paths have their price.
Her words were simple, but the weight behind them was immense. I left the office that night feeling both free and bound, like someone who had crossed a threshold they didn't know existed. When I got home, I found one last envelope under my door. Inside was a single sentence, handwritten in the same careful script as before. When you stop searching for who you were, you'll discover who you are. I didn't understand it completely, but for the first time in months, I didn't feel afraid. I felt open, uncertain, but awake. That night, I stood by the window again, watching the city lights shimmer like scattered mirrors. And I realized that maybe the real transformation was never about becoming something else. It was about finally seeing what was already there. The following week felt lighter, as though the floor beneath my feet had changed from steel to something human. The endless pressure I had lived under began to fade, replaced by quiet observation. It wasn't that work had become easier. Deadlines still arrived, clients still argued, but the way I carried myself through each hour felt new. I could sense the temperature of a room before a word was spoken. I could feel the weight of someone's mood like a shift in air. The habits Lucille had drilled into me had taken root, but they no longer felt like orders. They were instincts. On Thursday evening, my phone vibrated with a short message, rooftop, 9 p.m. I almost smiled. That was how it had begun, with those clipped commands that once made my stomach twist. Now I only felt curiosity. When I reached the rooftop, the wind was sharp and clean. Lucille stood near the edge, her coat drawn tight, the city glowing below like an electric sea. For a long moment we didn't speak. She looked different somehow, still composed, but gentler. You've changed, she said finally. So have you, I replied, surprising myself. She smiled faintly. Maybe. But this isn't about me. It's about whether you understand why I did it. I thought carefully before answering. Because the company wants adaptable people.
She shook her head.
Because you were terrified of failure, and people who are terrified build walls. You would have spent your whole life proving things instead of experiencing them.
She paused.
You remind me of who I was before someone did the same for me.
That admission caught me off guard.
Someone trained you. Trained, tested, reshaped, choose a word. Back then I thought it was cruelty.
Later I saw it as clarity.
I didn't want to repeat the pain, but sometimes pain is the only doorway people walk through willingly. We stood in silence again, the city humming beneath us. I used to think you were trying to erase me, I said quietly. Now I think you were trying to show me what was underneath all the noise.
Lucille nodded. And what did you find? I looked out at the lights.
Someone quieter.
Not afraid of being seen anymore.
Maybe that's enough. She studied me for a moment, then held out a small card. My name, Eli Marin, was printed on it again.
The sight of it startled me. You can take it back, she said. Or you can leave it blank.
That's your choice now.
I turned the card over in my hands.
The edges caught the light, reflecting a soft gleam like the mirror room on the 19th floor. For months that reflection had frightened me, now it simply reminded me of how far I'd come.
I'll keep it, I said.
But it doesn't define me anymore. Lucille exhaled, almost like relief.
Good.
Then my work here is done. She moved toward the door, but before leaving she stopped and added, You'll take over the orientation program next quarter. The new hires will need someone who understands what alignment really means. Then she was gone, leaving me alone with the skyline. I stayed there long after the door closed. The wind was colder now, but it carried something honest in it, a reminder of everything I'd feared, endured, and finally released. I thought of the first day I'd walked into her office, all nerves and armor. The version of me that stood here now felt both older and lighter, like a story rewritten in calmer ink. In the weeks that followed, I took over her sessions on floor 19. I watched new recruits sit in the same chair I once had, their faces a mixture of confusion and hope. I told them what Lucille never told me outright, that transformation isn't a punishment, it's a mirror, and that real strength begins the moment you stop needing to prove who you are. Sometimes, when the building is quiet late at night, I catch my reflection in the glass and almost expect to see Lucille's shape beside mine. She's gone to another division now, or maybe another city entirely, but her lessons remain in the rhythm of every breath I take. And on certain evenings, when the lights flicker across the skyline, I whisper the words she left me with. When you stop searching for who you were, you'll discover who you are.
I no longer ask what she meant. I live it. A year has a way of softening memory.
The sharp edges of what once felt unbearable become smaller, quieter. When I think back to those early days at Vasara Dynamics, the sleepless nights, the endless questions about who I was and what I was becoming, it no longer feels like punishment. It feels like a language I had to learn so I could finally speak to myself. My office now sits 3 floors below where Lucille's once was. Her space remains empty, a glass cube overlooking the same skyline she used to study. Sometimes I still go up there after hours, not to chase her presence but to remind myself of the perspective she forced me to find. From that height, the city doesn't look like chaos. It looks like a pulse. The orientation program is mine now. The first day I stood before a new group of recruits, I felt the same nerves I had when I first met her.
But I didn't use her exact methods.
I couldn't. I made the program about reflection, yes, but also about balance. I told them that change should be choice, not coercion, that adaptation means seeing yourself clearly enough to decide which parts are worth keeping. Some of them looked uncertain, the way I used to. Others leaned forward, listening too closely, as if searching for the hidden rule beneath my words. I smiled then because I knew the truth. There was no hidden rule anymore. The rule was simply awareness. Outside of work, life slowed down. I moved to a quieter neighborhood, bought plants that I kept alive for more than a month, started journaling again, something I hadn't done since college. Reading my own handwriting sometimes feels strange, like reading letters from a different person.
In a way, that's true.
Every so often, an envelope appears in my mail. No return address, just my name in looping, precise handwriting.
Inside, a single line.
The last one said, "Balance isn't found. It's practiced."
I don't need to ask who sends them.
Lucille's absence has become its own kind of mentorship. Silent, but steady. The strangest part of all this is how ordinary my life has become.
I drink my coffee slowly now instead of between meetings. I take walks without my phone.
Sometimes, when I catch my reflection in a shop window, I don't pause to evaluate it.
I simply nod at whoever looks back.
People still ask me what alignment really means.
I tell them it's when your inside finally stops fighting you outside.
When the noise quiets enough for you to hear your own pulse beneath everything else. And sometimes, on late nights when the building is empty and the city lights hum like they used to, I find myself whispering those same words again. Less as a lesson now, more as gratitude. When you stop searching for who you were, you'll discover who you are. The sentence no longer feels like a destination.
It feels like motion.
Like breathing. Like the quiet rhythm of a life that's finally, fully my own.